Son of a gun. Date: Saturday, May 18, 2025. Part 1. The Descent. Chapter 1. The Legacy of Lead. The air in the garage was thick with the scent of motor oil and something vaguely metallic, a smell Harry had come to associate with ambition. Not the kind of ambition that built empires or cured diseases, but the kind that carved out a corner of the world with a clenched fist and an unyielding will. Harry Blackwood, 41 years old and feeling every single one of them, stood over his son, Josh, whose small hands fumbled with the intricate parts of a disassembled carburetor. "See, son." Harry's voice was a gravelly murmur, a product of too many late nights and shouted orders. "It's all about precision. Every piece has a purpose. Just like in life, every move you make, every choice." He trailed off, looking at Josh, his 11-year-old boy, with an intensity that often made Bayek, his wife, nervous. Bayek, 38, was the gentle counterpoint to Harry's rough edges. She believed in books, in quiet evenings, in a future built on education and opportunity. Harry believed in strength, in self-reliance, in a world where you took what you needed and defended what was yours. And he wanted Josh to inherit that same steel, that same street wisdom. More than that, he wanted Josh to be a man in the way Harry understood it, tough, respected, feared if necessary. He wanted Josh to grow up a lot like him. No, he wanted Josh to grow up better than him, which, paradoxically, meant hardening him to the world's cruelties, shaping him into something Harry privately, and somewhat dangerously, thought of as a thug, not a mindless brute, but a sharp, resilient survivor. "Dad, can't we just play the game?" Josh asked, wiping grease on his worn jeans, his eyes fixed on the Xbox controller on the workbench. His voice was soft, still high-pitched, completely devoid of the gravel Harry possessed. Harry sighed, a plume of frustration escaping him. "Games are for soft heads, Josh. Life ain't a game. You gotta be ready. Gotta know how things work. Gotta know how to handle yourself. How to handle tools." He gestured vaguely at the carburetor, then glanced at the locked metal box tucked away in the shadows, its contents a silent promise of power. Bayek, standing in the doorway, a soft apron tied around her waist, watched them with a worried frown. "Harry, leave the boy be. He's got homework." Her voice, usually like a warm blanket, was edged with a familiar tension. "He's learning life lessons, Bayek," Harry said, without turning. "Things they don't teach in no school." Bayek's lips thinned. She knew what life lessons Harry was talking about. She saw the glint in his eyes, the subtle shift in his posture when he spoke of the world he moved in, a world she prayed Josh would never truly glimpse. She saw the shadow of the man Harry wanted Josh to become, and it terrified her. Harry just wanted his son to be prepared. He believed the world was a battlefield, and a boy had to learn to carry a sword, or in Harry's case, a gun, even if metaphorically. He'd seen too many good men broken by the streets, too many naive souls chewed up and spat out. He wouldn't let that happen to Josh. Not on his watch. He'd raised Josh to be strong, to be feared, to be untouchable. And if that meant exposing him to things Bayek deemed unsavory, then so be it. The world didn't care about clean hands. It cared about survival. Chapter 2. The Initiation. It was a Saturday, May 18, 2025, just like any other, except Harry had a plan. A lesson for Josh. One that went beyond carburetors. Bayek was visiting her sister, giving Harry the perfect window. "Get dressed, champ," Harry said to Josh at breakfast, a plate of greasy bacon and eggs between them. "We're going on an adventure." Josh's eyes lit up. "Like to the lake?" Harry chuckled, a hollow sound. "Better. We're going to see how the real world works. You're old enough now, son. You need to understand." The drive was long, the urban landscape slowly giving way to industrial blight. Broken windows, crumbling brick, the skeletal remains of forgotten factories. This was the landscape of Harry's business. He had told Bayek he was in logistics, a vague term that covered a multitude of sins and the movement of various illicit commodities. Today, however, wasn't about a drop-off or a pickup. It was about an introduction. The warehouse was a hulking, windowless beast, tucked away down a forgotten alley. Rust crawled up its corrugated sides like a disease, and a single, flickering fluorescent light illuminated the dark entrance. Harry pulled his beat-up sedan into a hidden parking spot at the back. Inside, the air was cold and stale, heavy with the cloying sweetness of processed chemicals, a scent Harry had come to associate with profit. Crates stacked to the ceiling, pallets wrapped in black plastic, the hushed murmur of voices and the occasional clatter of machinery. This was Kojo's domain, the young boss, barely 28, who ran the local drug operation. A few men, burly and watchful, straightened as Harry and Josh entered. Their eyes lingered on Josh, curious, then narrowed. Harry strode forward, his arm resting on Josh's shoulder, a silent assertion of ownership. Harry, one of the men, a scarred giant named Tank, rumbled. Kojo ain't gonna like this. He said no outsiders. His gaze was fixed on Josh, a silent warning. Harry just smiled, a thin, humorless pull of his lips. He won't mind. This is family. He steered Josh past them, deeper into the warehouse, towards a small, makeshift office constructed from plywood and cheap drywall. Kojo, lean and coiled, with eyes that missed nothing, looked up from a desk piled high with ledgers and plastic bags filled with white powder. He was young, but his gaze was old, cynical. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Josh. Harry, we had an understanding, Kojo said, his voice deceptively soft, but with an underlying current of steel. No one else comes here. You know the rules. He's my son, Kojo, Harry replied, his voice firm, unwavering. He's learning. This is important. Kojo leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He ran a hand through his closely shorn hair. Important? You showing him the family business, Harry. Something like that, Harry said, pulling out a chair for Josh, who looked around with wide, slightly bewildered eyes, taking in the strange surroundings, the hushed intensity, the faint chemical smell. This ain't no playground, Harry, Kojo warned, his voice hardening slightly. You put us all at risk. Harry waved a dismissive hand. Relax. He's a good kid. Quiet. He won't say nothin'. Kojo stared at them for a long moment, then shrugged, a gesture of resignation. Your funeral, Harry. Just keep him away from the product, and don't let him touch anything. For real. Harry nodded, his attention already shifting to Josh. He pulled up a second chair and sat down next to his son, placing his hand protectively on Josh's small back. The air was thick with unspoken tension, but Harry ignored it. This was for Josh. This was his future. Chapter 3. The Unforeseen Bullet. They sat for what felt like an eternity, the low hum of the warehouse and the distant murmurs of the men filling the silence. Harry, oblivious to the simmering resentment of Kojo and his crew, leaned close to Josh. See this, son. Harry gestured vaguely around the makeshift office, at the stacks of boxes, the scales, the almost casual display of illicit substances. This is power. This is how you make your own way. Nobody gives you nothing in this life. You gotta take it. You gotta be smart. You gotta be strong. You gotta understand how the world really works, beyond what they tell you in school. Josh nodded, his eyes wide, absorbing the strange, new environment. He wasn't scared, not exactly. More curious. He trusted his dad. What about my future, Dad? He asked, his voice a soft echo in the cavernous space. Harry's eyes softened for a moment, a rare glimpse of tenderness. Your future, son. Your future is whatever you make it. But you gotta make it yours. You gotta stand tall. You gotta be a leader, not a follower. People gotta listen when you talk. They gotta respect you. He paused, reaching into his jacket. And sometimes, son, respect is earned with authority. He pulled out his handgun, a heavy, black Sig Sauer, and placed it on the rough wooden table between them. It was a familiar weight in his hand, a symbol of control, of protection. He wanted Josh to understand that. He wanted him to understand the weight of it, the power it represented. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from outside the office. Shouts, a clatter, then Kojo's voice, raised in an angry snarl. Who the hell is that? Harry's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of professional concern replacing the paternal intensity. He'd left the gun on the table, a stark, metallic presence, a dark, silent lesson. Stay here, Josh, Harry commanded, his voice sharp now, fully in business mode. He stood up swiftly, his chair scraping loudly, and walked out of the office, his gaze fixed on the disturbance. Josh, left alone, stared at the gun. It was bigger than he expected, darker. He'd seen them in movies, of course, and his dad talked about them sometimes. He reached out a hesitant finger, touching the cold metal. It was strangely heavy. He picked it up, mimicking the way he'd seen his dad hold it. It felt awkward, unbalanced in his small hands. He aimed it, just for a moment, at the door Harry had just walked through. He imagined himself a hero in a video game, stopping bad guys. He aimed it, then, at Harry's back, who was now visible through the doorway, still talking loudly with Kojo. Bang! Josh whispered, a soft, childish sound. He giggled, a pure, innocent sound in the grim surroundings. I got you, Dad. You're dead. He raised the gun again, pointing it, a playful gleam in his eyes. Harry, still in the doorway, turned slightly, sensing the shift behind him, the sudden silence from Josh. He saw his son, just a boy, holding the gun. Not just holding it, but pointing it at him. A chill, colder than the warehouse air, shot down Harry's spine. He saw the innocence in Josh's eyes, the complete lack of understanding of what he held. Josh didn't know. He was too young to understand what the gun did. He was playing. Josh, put it down. Harry's voice cracked, a raw, desperate sound. He took a step back, then another, his heart hammering against his ribs. Panic seized him. He didn't want to scare Josh, to make him drop it, or worse. Just get away. Get out of the line of fire. He needed to disarm him, but he was afraid of making any sudden movements that might startle Josh. He turned, the instinct for self-preservation overwhelming. He bolted, running out of the office, towards the main warehouse floor, towards the exit. He was afraid Josh might get him shot by mistake. Or worse, shoot himself. Just as Harry reached the warehouse door, his fingers fumbling for the cold steel handle, a deafening crack split the air. Bang! The sound vibrated through Harry's very bones, rattling the dust from the rafters. It wasn't him. It wasn't the gang. It was the gun. His gun. Harry froze, his hand still on the door handle, his blood turning to ice. A strangled cry, more animal than human, escaped his throat. Outside, the few passers-by on this desolate street heard the shot. A second later, they saw a man, Harry, burst out of the grimy warehouse door, his face a mask of terror, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked like a ghost. The passer-by, a homeless man named Earl, who'd been rummaging through a nearby dumpster, squinted. He'd heard gunfire before, and the way that man ran. Earl cautiously approached the open warehouse door, a chilling premonition settling in his gut. He peered inside, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The warehouse, full of drugs and illegal activity, was suddenly silent. Then he saw him, a young boy, no older than 11, lying on the floor of the makeshift office. A dark, rapidly spreading stain blossomed on his small chest. Earl saw the gun on the floor next to him. He saw the boy's lifeless eyes. A strangled gasp escaped him. The boy was dead. Harry, a few yards from the door, his heart screaming inside him, stopped. The deafening echo of the shot still rang in his ears. He turned slowly, almost unwillingly, his mind racing, pleading with itself that it wasn't true. He had to go back. His son. He re-entered the warehouse, stumbling, his legs like lead. He saw the small, still form on the floor. He saw the men from Kojo's crew, frozen in their positions, their faces pale, staring. He saw the growing red stain. His son, Josh. Harry dropped to his knees, a guttural sob tearing from his throat. He reached out, his hand trembling, to touch the cold, pale skin of his son's cheek. He was right. Josh had shot himself. By mistake. The people who were standing outside, the few workers who hadn't fled, slowly converged. They saw Harry, kneeling over the boy, covered in blood. They saw the gun. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. He killed him. He killed the kid. He killed him. Someone shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Harry. Get him. Another voice yelled, closer, louder. Harry looked up, his eyes bloodshot, seeing the accusatory glares, the rising anger. They thought he had done it. They thought he had murdered his own son. The horror of Josh's death mixed with the immediate threat of the mob. Harry knew he had to run. Not just from these angry bystanders, but from the gang. Kojo. He didn't just bring an outsider. He brought a child, and now that child was dead in the drug-filled warehouse. The exposure, the police, the heat. Harry knew he was going to get killed by the gang that had told him not to bring anyone there. He stood up, stumbling, his mind a whirlwind of grief and terror. He had to disappear. He had to vanish. He ran away from the trouble, leaving his dead son, leaving the accusations, leaving everything. Part 2. The Fallout. Chapter 4. Ghost in the City. Harry ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached, until the familiar streets blurred into a canvas of fear. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. Away from the staring eyes, away from the dead weight of his son's body, away from the deafening silence that followed the gunshot. He wandered the city like a ghost, his mind replaying the scene, Josh's playful grin, the glint of the gun, the explosion, the sickening thud. Each memory was a stab wound, bleeding him dry. News traveled fast on the streets. A dead boy in a drug warehouse. A man seen fleeing. The whispers turned to shouts. The police were involved now. People knew that the warehouse had drugs inside. Harry was instantly the prime suspect. Meanwhile, a quiet, tenacious man named Frezzo, aged 34, was already on the case. Detective Frezzo wasn't flashy. He was methodical. He looked for facts, for patterns, for the truth hidden beneath layers of lies. He knew the warehouse was a known hub for Kojo's operation, and a dead child in such a place screamed for answers. The initial reports were hazy, contradictory. A father, a son, a gun. Murder. Accident. Frezzo suspected there was more to it. He pushed for surveillance footage from every angle, from every shaky street camera, every hidden corner of the warehouse itself. It was a long shot. Most of these places didn't want cameras. But Kojo, for all his ruthlessness, was also meticulous. He liked to keep tabs on his own. Harry, huddled in a derelict abandoned building, shivering despite the mild air, felt the walls closing in. He scrolled through the news on his cheap burner phone, the headlines screaming at him: child fatality in suspected drug den, father sought in son's death. He saw his own face, grainy and distorted, plastered on the screen. He thought, I better go and hide out from everyone. He knew what this looked like. He knew what people would think. He'd brought his son to a drug house, his son was dead, and he had fled. He thought that he might go to jail for the drugs. For the death of his son. And the worst thought, the one that twisted his gut into knots: people may think that I murdered my son, Josh. The very idea was a living hell. And then there was the gang. Kojo. The warehouse was exposed. The drugs were probably confiscated. They had lost everything, and it was his fault. He knew them. They wouldn't just let that go. The gang was out to kill Harry for their loss of the drug. He was a dead man walking, caught between the law and the ruthless vengeance of the streets. Chapter 5. The Price of Retribution. Harry kept moving, a phantom in his own city, but he couldn't outrun the gnawing worry for Bayek. He knew she'd be frantic. He hadn't called her, couldn't risk it. The police would be watching her house. Kojo's men too. He was right. The gang, led by Kojo, didn't waste time looking for Harry. They knew where to strike to cause him the most pain. If they couldn't get Harry, they'd hit what he loved. And there was nothing Harry loved more than Bayek. It happened quickly, brutally. Bayek, alone in their quiet suburban home, was preparing dinner, probably wondering where her husband and son were, her heart heavy with dread. The doorbell rang. She opened it, expecting a neighbor, perhaps the police. She found Kojo's men. They didn't waste words. They wanted Harry. She didn't know where he was. They didn't care. The message had to be sent. The price for Harry's betrayal, for the loss of their product, for the exposure, had to be paid. Bayek was found by a neighbor the next morning. It was a clean, merciless job. No struggle, just a cold, deliberate act of revenge. Harry heard it on the news, a brief mention tucked away in the local crime report, almost an afterthought to the ongoing investigation into his son's death. Another homicide linked to drug ring. He almost dismissed it, until the address was given. His address. The world tilted. He stumbled, catching himself on a grimy wall. Bayek. Murdered. The grief for Josh had been a searing, unbearable pain, a wound that refused to close. But this was different. This was cold, calculated fury. This was rage, pure and unadulterated, a burning inferno in his chest. They had taken his son by accident, a tragic mistake. But they had taken Bayek intentionally. They had come into his home, into his life, and ripped away the last piece of light he had. The fear of jail, the fear of the gang, it all evaporated, replaced by a singular, consuming purpose. Revenge. He had nothing left to lose. Nothing. He knew one man who could help him. One man who understood this kind of world, this kind of fight. Harry found a payphone, his hands shaking as he punched in the familiar number. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Yeah. Mikey, Harry rasped, his voice hoarse with unshed tears and burning hatred. It's Harry. I need you. Mikey, aged 41, a family friend from way back, and a well-known veteran, had seen things, done things, that few civilians could comprehend. He knew what kind of man Harry was, and he knew the dark places Harry sometimes ventured. He also knew Harry's family. Mikey had seen Josh grow up, had shared beers with Harry while Bayek joked about the childish antics. He listened to Harry's fractured, grief-stricken tale, his own face hardening with each whispered detail. Josh, the warehouse, the accidental shot, Bayek. A long silence stretched between them. Then, Mikey's voice, low and steady, a calming anchor in Harry's storm. Where are you, Harry? I'm coming to get you. And then, we'll talk about what happens next. The resolve in Mikey's voice was a balm to Harry's shattered soul. He had an ally. He had a weapon. And he had a purpose. Part 3. The Reckoning. Chapter 6. A Cold Calculation. Mikey found Harry looking more dead than alive, a hollow shell haunted by unspeakable horrors. He didn't offer platitudes or sympathy. Mikey was a man of action. He made sure Harry had food, a shower, and a few hours of uneasy sleep, all while listening, truly listening, to Harry's story. So, what's the plan, Harry? Mikey asked, his voice devoid of emotion, as they sat in Mikey's cramped apartment, maps of the city spread across the table. His eyes, though, were sharp, analytical. Harry looked up, his eyes bloodshot but focused. Kojo, his crew, they took everything, Mikey. My son, my wife, everything. His voice was raw, laced with venom. They have to pay. Mikey nodded slowly. He understood vengeance. He'd seen it in the deserts and mountains, etched onto the faces of soldiers and civilians alike. You want to hit them where it hurts. Their product, their operation, and their lives. Yes, Harry breathed, a single, sharp exhale. It's a suicide mission, Harry. Against Kojo's full crew. You think he doesn't have reinforcements, lookouts, heavy hitters? I don't care, Harry said, his voice flat, resolute. I have nothing left to lose. I just need to make sure they lose everything too. Mikey studied him, a long, assessing gaze finding the deep well of grief and rage in Harry's eyes. He knew no words would dissuade him. And, in a strange, dark way, he understood. Bayek had been a good woman. Josh, a good kid. Okay, Mikey said, sighing. But we do this my way. Smart. Calculated. Not a blind charge. They spent the next day gathering intelligence. Mikey pulled strings, leveraged old contacts, piecing together Kojo's network, his usual haunts, the locations of his various stash houses and safe zones. Harry provided the street-level knowledge, the small details, the faces he knew. They loaded the guns, Harry's standard Glock, Mikey's military-grade assault rifle, along with an assortment of smaller firearms and extra magazines. They checked their vests, their comms. Mikey, the veteran, moved with a practiced efficiency that was both chilling and reassuring. He wasn't just Harry's friend now, he was his tactical partner, his shield. They got into Mikey's beat-up, nondescript van, an anonymous shell in a city full of them. The silence in the van was heavy, pregnant with the promise of violence. Harry gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Mikey sat beside him, calm and composed, the hum of the engine the only sound. You ready for this, Harry? Mikey asked, his eyes scanning the route on his phone. Harry looked straight ahead, his gaze fixed on the road, on the grim destination ahead. Ready as I'll ever be. Chapter 7. The Last Stand. The address Mikey had pinpointed was another warehouse, larger than the last, an active hub of Kojo's operations. This one was heavily fortified, ringed by cameras and watchful eyes. It was late evening, the perfect time. The gang would be active, but perhaps unwary. Harry parked the van a block away, down a dark alley. They moved like shadows, Harry's bulky frame surprisingly agile, Mikey a ghost in the night. The plan was simple: get in, neutralize the threat, and get out. Retribution, swift and brutal. As they breached the perimeter, alarms blared, and shouts erupted from inside. The gunfight began. It was chaos. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark interior of the warehouse like a strobe light. The roar of gunfire was deafening. Harry fired with a desperate, primal fury, his grief and rage fueling every shot. He saw red, focusing only on the targets in front of him, the faces of the men who had taken everything from him. Mikey was a force of nature. His military training kicked in, movements precise, deadly. He moved with a veteran's grace, covering Harry, delivering devastatingly accurate shots. He cleared rooms, secured flanks, an invisible guardian. Bodies dropped, guns clattered. The air filled with the scent of cordite and blood. Harry and Mikey fought side by side, a dance of destruction. Harry, fueled by vengeance, engaged in a brutal, close-quarters battle, his shots ragged but determined. Mikey, cold and efficient, systematically dismantled the gang's defenses. It was a protracted, brutal exchange, but slowly, inexorably, the tide turned. The gang members, though numerous, were disorganized, panicked. They were no match for Mikey's tactical prowess and Harry's desperate ferocity. Finally, the firing tapered off. Silence, even more chilling than the noise, descended. The warehouse was a graveyard of broken crates, spent casings, and still forms. Harry stood amidst the carnage, breathing heavily, his gun still raised, trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. They had won. They had avenged Bayek. Clear. Mikey's voice was a low rasp, a hint of exhaustion in it. He gestured towards the exit. Let's go, before someone else shows up. Harry nodded, holstering his weapon. He felt empty, strangely unsatisfied. The vengeance was sweet, but it hadn't brought back Josh. It hadn't brought back Bayek. They moved quickly, slipping past the dead, towards the van. They were almost there. Mikey was about to open the passenger door, Harry already getting behind the wheel. A faint groan. Harry turned, his head snapping towards the sound. A figure stirred amidst the shadows, a lone gang member, bleeding and broken, but still alive. He raised a shaky hand, a small pistol clutched within. You bastards! The man croaked, and fired. Bang! The shot rang out, impossibly loud in the silence. Mikey, who had just reached for the van door, jerked. His eyes widened, a flicker of pain, then surprise, then nothing. He slumped forward, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. Mikey, Harry screamed, a raw, tormented sound that tore through the night. The last living gang member, satisfied, dropped his gun, a faint, almost triumphant smirk on his lips. Harry saw it all. He saw Mikey fall. He saw the smirk, the grief, the rage, the unimaginable loss. It all converged into a single, blinding white-hot fury. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He pulled his gun, stumbling back out of the van, towards the man, his vision blurred by tears and uncontrollable rage. He emptied his magazine, shot after shot, until the last gang member was nothing more than a lifeless heap. Then, Harry stood there, alone in the bloody aftermath, the gun still smoking in his hand. He had killed them all. But at what cost? He looked at Mikey, his friend, his only ally, lying still. Another life taken. Another ghost in his wake. The vengeance was complete. And Harry was utterly, irrevocably, alone. Part 4. The Unveiling. Chapter 8. The End of the Line. Harry drove, his mind a chaotic maelstrom of grief, adrenaline, and exhaustion. Mikey's lifeless eyes haunted him. The echoes of the gunfight reverberated in his skull. What was left? Nothing. There was nothing left for him here. The only thing he could do now was run. Run as far and as fast as he could. He set his course for the airport. A plane. A new land. A new life. A life where Harry Blackwood didn't exist, where the ghosts of Josh, Bayerg, and Mikey couldn't follow. He'd start fresh, somewhere no one knew his name, no one knew his crimes, no one knew his unbearable losses. The airport was a blur of lights, echoing announcements, and the endless stream of humanity. Harry moved through it like a sleepwalker, clutching his single, worn duffel bag. He bought a last-minute ticket, cash only, to the furthest destination he could find. He went through security, his heart pounding, half expecting the hand on his shoulder. It never came. He walked towards his gate, the scent of jet fuel promising escape. He could almost taste freedom, almost feel the weight of his past lifting. He showed his boarding pass at the gate desk, his eyes fixed on the open door of the plane, a metallic bird of salvation. He took a deep, shuddering breath. This was it. Harry Blackwood. The voice was calm, authoritative. Harry froze, his hand already reaching for the plane's door. He turned slowly, his blood turning to ice. A man stood there, impeccably dressed, his eyes intelligent and weary. Detective Frezzo. 34 years old, but his gaze carried an ancient wisdom. Harry's shoulders slumped. His gunfight, his flight, his revenge, it was all for nothing. They had caught him. He was going to jail. For life. He thought he got the blame for his son Josh's death. And Kojo and his gang's drugs. And Mikey. And Bayerg. The list felt endless. He just nodded, a silent admission of defeat. That's me. Detective Frezzo, the man said, extending a hand, surprisingly calmly. We need to talk. Harry expected cuffs, stern questions, the cold reality of a jail cell. He prepared himself to confess, to take whatever punishment was coming. He deserved it. He had ruined everything. But Frezzo just looked at him with an oddly sympathetic gaze. Don't worry, Mr. Blackwood, he said, his voice quiet, almost kind. You're not going to jail for your son's death. Harry stared, his mind struggling to process the words. What? But, the warehouse, the gun. Frezzo stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Harry could hear. We found it, Mr. Blackwood. The video footage. Harry's breath hitched. Video. Yes. Kojo liked to keep tabs on everything. His security system was far more comprehensive than we initially thought. We got his main server. It filmed everything. Frezzo paused, allowing the information to sink in. We saw it, Mr. Blackwood. We saw your son. We saw him pick up the gun. We saw him point it at you, joking. And we saw him shoot himself. By mistake. Harry stumbled back, leaning against the gate desk, his legs suddenly weak. The world spun. The image of the video played in his mind, clear as day now. Josh. His innocent boy. It wasn't him. It wasn't murder. It was an accident. A tragic, horrifying, soul-destroying accident, but an accident nonetheless. Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down his face. Not tears of remorse, not tears of fear, but tears of a terrible, agonizing relief. Relief that the world knew. Relief that Josh's death wasn't on his hands, not directly. Thank you, Harry choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for believing me. For finding out. Frezzo nodded. It's my job, Mr. Blackwood. And speaking of jobs, we got Kojo. He's been arrested, along with most of his high-ranking crew. The warehouse was a goldmine for us, thanks to your unwitting help. Harry could only stare, dumbfounded. The boss, Kojo, arrested. It was over. The drug empire, the gang, the threat, all gone. Not by his hand, not by his revenge, but by the relentless, quiet pursuit of justice. Frezzo looked at the boarding pass in Harry's hand, then at the open plane door. You're free to go, Mr. Blackwood. He offered a small, knowing smile. Start fresh. Somewhere far from here. You've been through enough. Harry looked at the plane, then back at Frezzo. A deep breath. A new life. He would carry the scars, the unbearable memories, the crushing weight of his mistakes. But the chain of vengeance was broken. The guilt, at least for Josh's death, was lifted. Thank you, Detective Frezzo, Harry said, his voice hoarse, but with a new, fragile note of hope. Frezzo nodded, turning to leave, already focused on his next case. Harry stood for a moment, then walked towards the plane. He stepped inside, leaving behind the wreckage of his past, the pain, the blood, the vengeance. He carried only his grief, which would always be with him, a part of his soul. But now, perhaps, he could begin the long, arduous journey of healing. He found a window seat, watched the city lights recede, and embraced the vast, terrifying, and utterly uncertain expanse of a new life. The plane climbed into the night sky, carrying a broken man towards a fresh start. The end. Story by Kayode Ike.